Good evening. Good evening. My name is Richard Miles, and I'm the chairman of the Trinity Forum. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's conversation with Ben Sasse. There are almost 900 of us here tonight. We're also live streaming this, so welcome viewers. And it will be recorded and available on our website and YouTube channel shortly. So if you know of anyone that wanted to be here tonight but could not, please let them know. Of course, tonight would not be possible without the generous support of many eager sponsors. Indeed, it was probably the only time in our history that we had to say, no, really, we have enough. I'd especially like to thank the College Board for its sponsorship of tonight's conversation. Even before this idea became a reality, they said, we will help you make it happen. I'd like to also recognize the many other sponsors that are here tonight, including the Center for Christianity and Public Life, the Museum of the Bible, Veritas School, which provided the copies of our Democracy in America readings, which you received tonight, Brent and Katie Allen, David Campaign with Blue Trust, Andy and Catherine Eshelman, Philip and Azriel Gredick, Catherine Haley, Murray and A.T. Johnson, Ed and Karen Moy, Aging with Dignity, and Michael Lucchese with Pipe Creek Consulting. And a very special thank you to Mark Batterson and the National Community Church for hosting us here tonight. At this point, I would like to invite David Coleman, CEO of the College Board, to the stage for some brief remarks.
As I thought about what I would say to Ben, about Ben, and to those who love him, I decided to make 3 promises with you as my witness. 1 to laughter, 1 to work, and 1 to faith. First, laughter. When I heard Ben's news, like many of us, my first thought was for his children. I wrote to Ben and offered to mentor them somehow, because while I know Ben has many morally superior friends and more powerful friends, I thought perhaps I could contribute something being a cool guy from New York City. Ben may not have intended it, but his response was very funny. We all know what a hard pass is. Ben gave me the ultimate soft pass. In perhaps the greatest understatement ever recorded, he texted, "I've been under the weather. I'll get back to you." He has not gotten back to me. It is impossible to talk about Ben without talking about comedy. Ben is never too serious not to launch a zinger. At the end of Plato's Symposium, the dialogue on love, Socrates insists that the same person should be capable of writing both great tragedy and great comedy. In Athens, playwrights were strictly divided between the tragic poets and the comic poets, and no one did both well. Centuries later, Shakespeare proved Socrates right. For Shakespeare, tragedy is when time is running out. Comedy is when time doesn't matter. Comedy lives in the moment. Laughter defies fear. It may not be Shakespeare, but Ben did give us the hashtag and the podcast, Not Dead Yet. Ben, as long as we are here together on this earth and long after, we will strive for your magnificent combination of seriousness and humor. My second promise is about our unfinished work together. Before Ben fell ill, we had been kicking ideas back and forth about projects we might build together. Ben worries that too many of our young people are being delayed from adulthood. He believes they are capable of far more than what we ask of them. My promise to Ben is this: in the work ahead, we will keep striving to call young people upward toward agency, ownership, and service. Ben and I talked about cybersecurity, entrepreneurship, civic life, all as not just subjects, but pathways to being an adult. And I remember he was visiting me in my home, and he mentioned visiting Cyber Command in Israel and his delight at seeing astonishingly young people leading the country's defenses. He described watching them remove their helmets, their long hair falling out, and realizing that many of the people protecting the nation were young women. Ben loved that. He loves the idea that young people could defend their country, build businesses, support families, strengthen communities, not as passive consumers, but as builders. And Ben, I'm just glad to let you know that some of your dreams are beginning to unfold here at home. Indiana just built a road from high school work to a cybersecurity route in the National Guard. And alongside the American Enterprise Institute and the Chamber of Commerce, we're working to give students everywhere the tools of entrepreneurship and financial responsibility. We share Ben's conviction that the young can and must grow up, that they can build families sooner, that they can build community and responsibility, and in doing those things, honor God's gifts. And that brings me to promise 3, which is faith. As all of you know, Ben was the transformational leader of a small Christian college called Midland University in Nebraska. So it was fitting that we connected after I wrote a piece in the National Review defending the accreditation of Christian colleges. Some of the greatest eras of learning emerged in the belief that faith and reason were partners, not enemies. I often wonder whether one reason the universities have lost faith with the public is they have lost faith in the shared study of what is universal, the quiet study of long ago things. And Ben, I promise I will continue defending the role of faith traditions in learning and public life. Earlier this year, College Board and the great Trinity Forum launched a writing prize honoring Mike Gerson and the best writing of faith in the public square. Just last month, we helped secure access for homeschool students in Oklahoma to take the exams they wish in our public schools. A decade ago, in the National Review, I made a public wager that students at our Christian colleges would prove every bit as intellectually serious and capable as students anywhere else in the country, in their command of evidence, in their rhetorical powers, in the powers of their minds and hearts. No one has taken my bet. And Ben, over these past 3 months, or several months, you have become yourself one of our greatest living testimonies. And you've shown it looks like when one man does so many things well at once, living publicly and sacrificially. And since you've dedicated so much of your life to healing this fractured country, I hope you'll forgive me, but I know you won't, the grandiosity of quoting Lincoln at Gettysburg. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. The work that you, Ben, have most nobly advanced. Thank you.
As you can tell, I did not memorize my speech. Thank you, David. That was beautiful. I would like to recognize several special guests tonight. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Representative Adrian Smith of Nebraska, Adrian Smith of Nebraska, and the founder of the Trinity Forum, Oz Guinness, and his wife, Jenny. Thank you for coming. Also with us tonight are several members of the Sasse family, including Ben's wife, Melissa, and his son, Breck, and his mother and father-in-law, Jill and Larry McLeod. Thank you for traveling to Washington for tonight. In 2014, The Atlantic magazine published a piece on a little-known candidate running for an open Senate seat in Nebraska. The author felt compelled to instruct her readers as to the pronunciation of his last name. Sasse, not Sassy. Since then, many people know not only how his name is pronounced, they have come to know the man himself, and they have thoughts. In 2023, the National Review called Ben the rarest kind of public servant, one genuinely motivated by the betterment of his community. On Ben's last day in the Senate, Susan Collins of Maine took the Senate floor and said, "He is incredibly smart. He combines that with being incredibly principled. He lives by his principles. He is always willing to do the hard things, the right things, even when they aren't popular." Senator Mark Warner of Virginia recently said, "Ben never really thought about things as conservative, liberal. He much more thought about things as future, past." Last December, the chair of the Democratic Party of Nebraska wrote, "As always, Senator Sasse is saying goodbye with humor and a deep sense of calling for all of us to be bigger than ourselves for our country, exactly as he did many times during his service as U.S. Senator." Now, to be fair, Ben also has had his critics. After he was overwhelmingly reelected to the Senate in 2020, beating his opponent by 38 points, a certain federal government employee living in Washington, D.C. wrote, "The least effective of our 53 Republican senators and a person who truly doesn't have what it takes to be great is little Ben Sasse of Nebraska." So a range of opinions. Probably the best assessment of Ben Sasse's character, as well as that of Melissa, his wife of 31 years, is from someone who knows them really, really well. Last week, their daughter Alex published a piece in the Free Press entitled, "How Ben Sasse Raised Me." "Every single day of my childhood," she wrote, "my parents asked the same question at dinner. Not what did you learn, but who did you serve? At age 10, I found this habitual question annoying. At 22, I'm profoundly grateful that I get to view my life and work through the lens of service." Now, I don't know about you, but I'll take Alex's word for it regarding the character of her parents and the moral examples they set. And honestly, I think that's why most of us are here tonight. After the Sasses moved to the University of Florida, my wife, Phoebe, and I got to know Ben and Melissa as friends. Born and raised in Gainesville, we tried to mentor them in some of the unwritten rules of that quirky southern college town. Number one, we said, is that the Gators are not just the mascots of the university, they're the things that live in the pond right next to the university president's home. Number two, a loss to Georgia is upsetting, a loss to Florida State is traumatic. And number three, there is no such thing as too much Tom Petty. Ben and Melissa, looking back, I doubt that advice was particularly useful, but we are so thankful that even for a brief while, we were privileged to be your co-laborers in one small corner of God's kingdom. Thank you. Tonight's conversation with Ben will be led by my friend and colleague, Cherie Harder, president of the Trinity Forum. Please join me in welcoming Ben and Cherie to the stage.
This is wrong. I like that my wife didn't stand up. She was kind of waving at me. I'm not going to do it.
Ben, as you can tell, we are so glad you're here. It's great to have you here. It's great to have Melissa here and Breck here and your extended family. Welcome. And before we really dive into it, I think one thing that's on everybody's mind is just, how are you? I mean, we've been hearing all this news about breakthrough pancreatic cancer drugs. Is there a chance the prognosis is going to change?
Well, let's go small first. First of all, thank you all for making time. Sorry there wasn't more to do in D.C. on a Tuesday. I think it's the 40th anniversary of the release of Fletch, so we're all gathered on an important milestone. David Coleman, those comments were dishonest on so many fronts, so thank you for your generosity in lying. But David made me feel bad because I don't remember at all dropping the ball and getting back to him. I do a lot of morphine management right now, and so on a day like today, I ramp it the last couple days, so I still have enough in my system that I'm not in a lot of pain. But I'm not asleep in front of you either. So I cut my morphine off a lot, but my short-term memory is crap. And Tim Keller was a friend of mine. We weren't close, but I cared for Tim and knew him for a while, including during his dying years. He never told me this, but his family has since told me that in his last years, one of the benefits he saw in bad metastasized cancer is he didn't feel any guilt about not being good at managing his inbox, and I'm not over that yet. And David just made it worse, so he asked how I was doing. Like, I got a to-do list tonight when we leave. I'll speak to your specific point. I am an oncology rookie, but we have an amazing team at MD Anderson, and they tell us that in 40 years, pancreatic cancer is the most lethal form of cancer, 87% death rate in 5 years across everybody who has it, but of those diagnosed stage 4, which I was, 97% death rate within 12 months. It's nasty. But in 40 years, there have only been 2 good headlines, and both of them are in the last 60 days, and one of them is my drug, daraxonrasib. And at an oncology conference yesterday, I wasn't there, but as the story's been told to me by a few folks who were, about 4,000 folks, a bunch of super nerd researchers and a bunch of financiers who do pharma investing, 4,000 people, when Revolution Medicines was named, broke into a multi-minute standing ovation. Those are the makers of my drug. So it's a Silicon Valley, Stanford spinoff, these biotech guys that created this drug. And apparently, and again, I have none of this training, but they call it the greasy ball, the molecule that is pancreatic cancer's root, and you can't find a way to wedge the drug into it. So it's been considered undruggable. And the vast majority of deaths of cancer in the US have a relationship to this same problem with pancreatic, which is you can't deliver the drug against the molecule. And the breakthrough in daraxonrasib isn't just for pancreatic cancer, it's a new technique that we'll be able to use for molecular glue. So the good news is, Noah Smith, for those of you who read his Substack, formerly an economist at the University of Michigan, but now just a really good general journalist in America, Noah said, summarizing a lot of the news about pancreatic cancer of the last couple of months, he said, we are very likely at a place where we end cancer deaths within 30 years. Not end cancer, but end deaths from cancer within 30 years because of these breakthroughs. So it's amazing stuff for those of us who know that the curse post the Garden of Eden is far and wide, and we should seek to love our neighbor by restraining evil, and beating cancer is a really great thing that we should all cheer. So off the charts great news for somebody who's as sick as I am, but probably not soon enough to make a lot of difference. But extra months is a real blessing when you want to love your wife and kids. And so I was given 3 to 4 months to live in December, and I'm pushing 6 months already and probably have a bunch more months, and it's because of this miracle drug.
Well, hurrah. So let's kind of go back to the beginning. I think most people in the room know you either as a former senator or a university president, but before any of that, you were born in the tiny little town of, what was it, Plainview, Nebraska.
1,200 people, go
Pirates. There we go, yes. To Gary and Lynn, a high school teacher and football coach and a homemaker who split shortly after you were born. You have made it sort of a lifelong area of study for you, how character and formation happen. What formed Ben Sasse? How did Ben get to be Ben?
The German Lutheran stoic in my soul really doesn't like talking about myself that much, so I don't know. I mean, Shree's awesome, but what a bad question. Let's get to something interesting. I don't know. I'll give you 3 or 4. Her team is awesome. They said, you want Gatorade to not puke? You want Sprite to not puke? Good, good. We'll also put a big bucket behind your chair. So hopefully I don't need to use it, but I'm managing a wave, so forgive me sort of squirming around a little bit. Bucket one, incredibly blessed to be raised in a Christian home and be catechized. So I went to Trinity Lutheran Elementary School, and Luther's shorter catechism was a core part of our life to understand the whoop and wharf of Scripture. Number two, I'm making up a list. Let me just say there are 4 points. I don't have any yet, but I'll stop at 4. Number two, my dad was a football and wrestling coach, but all my family, besides my dad, were farmers. So I grew up, we lived in the town, but I would be bussed out to work on the farms in the summer of family members. And so I just grew up with a rhythm that work is a core part of what you do to live a life of gratitude and love your neighbor. And my grandfather, Elmer, used to regularly say that every hour of sleep before midnight was worth 2 hours of sleep after midnight. I don't know that there's a lot of Huberman Lab stuff at Stanford that's backing this up, but we believed it. So we got up really early, and you had to work before you got to do anything else. And I wanted to read the sports section every day, and my dad said you got to read an article on the front page, and you got to read an editorial before you can turn to the sports section. And Dad was pretty sports addicted. So like you learned this sense that there was always work that had to be done to serve other people before the next stuff. And I had, you mentioned my parents are the Kramer versus Kramer generation. So I was born in 72. My parents divorced in 73. They were both remarried by 76. And so divorce is terrible, but I had the least bad version of divorce because my parents were both remarried by the time I was 4, and all 4 of my parents got along. And so there was a rhythm to what respective authority looked like in two loving households. And I think that's only 3, so I'll say 4th is, man, did Husker football dominate all of my childhood.
So you went from the tiny town of Plainview to Harvard, then St. John's, then Yale. And then after graduating, you took what might be considered a fairly unusual career move. You worked as the executive director for the National Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, which is not the typical backstory of a senator. And I'm curious how, if at all, that season shaped your view of public life and civic formation.
That's interesting. I mean, that wasn't the motive. My miss and I got married coming right out of undergrad, and I worked for the Boston Consulting Group in Chicago first. And it was great yuppie sweatshop work in that every year you were going to get 2.5 or 3 years worth of work out of you because that were the hours. Those were the hours. There's a subject verb agreement in there somewhere. And I was working hard and long and enjoyed a lot of what I was learning, but we looked at how many people were 15 or 20 years down that career path and were divorced and marrying somebody 10 or 15 years younger once they had money, and then they were going to figure out what the rhythm of work home looked like, and we just thought that was a stupid order to tackle the problem in. So we left strategy consulting, and we're still wrestling through learning more theology together. And Mike Horton was a friend for a long time, a theologian at Westminster Seminary in California. And we had been volunteer advisors. Mike was theologically super sharp, but maybe wasn't that organizationally gifted. And they were raising a lot of money and growing an organization fast and didn't really have much of a theory of what the business model was. And so I'd been given informal advice, and there was a chance to try to put together a few organizations. And so I basically was taking business skills from the for-profit sector to help some not-for-profits go through a merger. But the payout for us was getting to be around a bunch of theologians and wrestle through some questions. Our son, who you all introduced, Richard introduced, we call him Breck, but his name is actually Augustine Breckenridge Warfield Sasse. Nebraska doesn't allow you to have that many letters on a birth certificate, so Augustine is who we were naming him after, but it's theologically a bit heady for a 8 or 10 or 12. He's 15 now, but on a football field you can't shout, "Go Augustine, City of God!" Woo! So there was a lot of two kingdoms theology that definitely informed my developing worldview, and reading a lot of Reformation theology, and I don't want to overplay Peace of Westphalia or something in our catechetical upbringing, but it was pretty clear that if you believe that government is a good, but it's a left-handed secular good, meaning it's a provisional good, in a world that's broken where people want to take your life and your liberty and your stuff, you want to restrain evil. That is a gift, that is a blessing, but it would be weird to make government the center of your worldview. And so the right posture toward government is, in my view, Washington's phrase, later worked out a lot more by Lincoln, of the silver frame and the golden apple. The purpose of government is the silver frame. It can never be the golden apple. Government exists to maintain a framework for ordered liberty, so the more important things can happen by voluntarism and persuasion and love. So when you free assemble here, or when you get to invite somebody to marry you, or you try to persuade somebody to buy your product or your service, or you try to persuade somebody on ultimate questions at your house of worship, you want a framework which restrains evil but doesn't try to coerce souls. And so it just seems to me there's a kind of 101 version of two kingdoms that all thoughtful Christians should have. And I definitely wanted to read in more depth about that. And so I spent some time helping the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. One of the problems with morphine is proper nouns just evaporate all the time. So I worked for this organization. I couldn't find the name there for a minute.
No worries. So you've always been known as an incredibly energetic guy. And just to kind of like bring us from the National Association of Confessing Evangelicals up to the public, or up to the present times, you worked in a consulting group. You were elected by the highest vote margin in Nebraska history to the Senate. You wrote 2 best-selling books. You turned around a small college. You went to University of Florida. You were in the midst of training for a triathlon when things started feeling not so right. And then you got the news of an unexpected terminal diagnosis. How did you and your family absorb that shock?
Well, first, let's linger on the stupidity of getting diagnosed while training for a triathlon. Holy smokes. I'm going to get in trouble with my wife because I just realized that I'm bleeding through my pants right here. One of the downsides of being on a KRAS mutation drug is it shuts off a lot of cell division, and one of them is skin growth. So I've gotten rid of the rash on my face, but my scalp is bleeding now, and I just realized I'm bleeding through my knee, so I apologize. But my wife is like, you look super tacky, honey. Why didn't you wear better pants? And I'm like, you know I'm cheap, and I bled on the last 2 pair yesterday. So I wear those 45-pound weight vests when I'm training a lot, and those are great to add extra pressure and fatigue for certain kinds of low-impact things, and it's okay to do some running with a 45-pound weight vest. It makes no sense at all to wear a weight vest when your back is at this angle riding a bike. And for some reason last fall, I just thought, I'm not getting enough time to work out lately. So when I have my weight vest on, training for this tri and the running events, if it's a day that I'm going to do a little running and a little biking, why not just leave it on to add some fatigue? And that would, I didn't reflect on it. It was just stupid. And all of a sudden I started having mid-October, late October, some really bad back pain that radiated like you kind of like a little kid when you feel like you're about to throw up in 7 seconds. And it would radiate from my back all along the front of my rib cage. And for 2 weeks, I was pretty convinced that I'd probably just pulled a bunch of abdominal muscles because I'd been wearing this weight vest on my bike. After 2 weeks of ignoring it, we started going to the doc, and for 2 weeks, they couldn't figure it out. And then eventually I asked for some full body scans, and the doc called me back, and this is the morning before Alex, our middle kid, she was going to graduate early from the University of Florida. And I went in for the scans, and the doc called me back. And you could just tell he was like beating around the bush. And I said, would you please just give me a hard fact? And at this point, he starts talking about how, well, one of the crazy things about our time is oncology care is so different than it used to be. And I'm like, dude, you've never told me I have cancer, and you're telling me that oncology care is a lot better than it used to be. Would you please man up? And he said, are you with family? I'm going to pull over. I'm driving. And I'm like, I'm okay. I can take it. Just give me a hard fact. And he said, Ben Sasse's torso is chock full of tumors. And I was like, well, that was answering the call for a hard fact. And I know that it has been weird for some of our family and friends to experience the last 5 months sympathetically, empathetically with us. And my mom jokingly says, how come you didn't return my call yesterday? I know you got time to do 1 million podcasts. We're truly not. Like, we do one public day every 10 to 14 days. Like, that's kind of the cadence we're in right now at our household. And for whatever reason, almost all these things go viral, and there's no false modesty here. I just don't think I'm saying anything very interesting. I think we live at a super weird time with so much peer segregation that death is universal. The curse, there's so much Genesis 3, Romans 5 stuff we can do. The universal nature of the curse means everybody, regardless of what Ray Kurzweil or Brian Johnson wants to make up, people know that death is real. And they're scared of death, but they don't have many conversations about it, and they're not around it because we're so generationally segregated. And so I sincerely called my wife. We were apart for 15 or 20 minutes just because of the flow of the morning the day before graduation, and then we were back together. And instantly, I felt at peace. The verse, to live as Christ, to die as gain. And to live as Christ in that context is Paul saying that the chance to do something to serve your neighbor on behalf of Christ is an opportunity for ongoing service. But Paul is saying that for him to die means you get beyond the curse that is in front of us. I'm not unique to having a death sentence. Every one of you have a death sentence. And as we look at the curse and look at death, it's right to call death an enemy, but it's also pretty great to be able to add that adjective final. To call it the final enemy means then all the bad will be undone and the tears will be wiped away. So we embraced, and Melissa said and felt the exact same stuff. She then did a really crappy job of hiding it from our kid for 24 hours, which was our plan. Our daughters are, Corey is turning 25 in a couple weeks, and Alex, who is graduating, is 22. And Breck is 15, and we decided that we would tell Corey and then try to hide it from Alex for 24 hours so she could have a normal college graduation. And Mom is a really bad poker player. Other than that, it was a pretty good weekend.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned Tim Keller, and you have quoted him a couple of times. He also recently died from pancreatic cancer. And he said that while he wouldn't wish pancreatic cancer on anyone, he also didn't ever want to go back to a time when mortality was not so vivid to him. It's something you've referred to as the prayer of pancreatic cancer. What is it that is gained when one's mortality is that vivid and present?
I think that work is awesome. The chance to love your neighbor and work hard and produce is awesome. Workaholism is a pretty terrible form of sin, and I've been guilty of it kind of my whole life. I think I don't do psychoanalysis well, but I kind of think I can look back to being 8 or 10 years old and self-medicating when something was hard or something hurt by just going and working harder. And there's a lot about that I still want to defend. Churchill, when he would be down around certain kinds of knowledge work, would go and lay bricks. And I think being able to go and do manual labor can and should be good therapy. Serving your neighbor and getting over yourself is really important. the idea that we can build a storehouse that's going to be lasting is a stupid lie, right? I can't even grow skin. I can't build a storehouse that's going to change the fact that I am a finite sinner who needs a Savior. And I get to do the trade where I bring the sin and Jesus brings the forgiveness. And at that moment, we all get to be little kids saying, Abba, Father, again forever. And all the good that we ever experience needs to be received as a gift, not as the outcome of my labor. It's great that justification I don't get to cooperate in, but getting to cooperate in sanctification is great. And getting to work is great. But at the end of the day, it's still a gift from the Lord. And we talk about Ecclesiastes a lot at our house, and you can read the beginning of Ecclesiastes and think it's nihilism, right? Like it's all vanity, it's all a chasing after the wind, it's all pointless. That's not what the author's saying. He's saying it's vanity and a chasing after the wind if you think you can corral it and put yourself at the center as opposed to receive it as a gift. And so I confess that I kind of lost the thread. Where did we start?
That's why I was asking you about what's gained by such a vivid knowledge of
Oh yeah,
one's own
thank
mortality.
you. The ability to tell the truth in your prayer about the fact that we are totally dependent and there's no functional deism that's ever going to either be true or satisfy us. I'm not the toughest guy on earth, but I'm pretty tough in terms of like the kind of work I did. As a kid, I have a moderately high pain threshold. I was in really terrible pain from Halloween until mid-December and couldn't figure out what was going on. And, we got a $800 water bill, something like that. Where I was basically spending the whole night in the shower every night. We've found a way to release the handle and get the water to scalding, and if I would just lie on the floor in the shower and have it hit the center of my back, it could take away a little bit of the pain, but it was rough. And so until I got the diagnosis, and then starting a couple days later, the morphine, and then daraxonrasib, we've shrunk my tumors by a ton, so I'm not nearly the pain I was in. But I look back now, and I'm super grateful that I had 6-7 hellacious weeks of pain, because there was just no ability to be tempted by workaholism. Oh, I'll just work through this one. I'll go build better stuff. I'll get another job or resume entry or deposit in your bank account. We're mortals. And I don't think I'd ever felt mortality as much as when you were in a lot of pain. And so David Gibson, a Scottish pastor who wrote a book called Living Life Backwards, which is basically a commentary on Ecclesiastes, he says that Ecclesiastes, or more broadly the wisdom literature, is wisdom that comes at you from behind as a punch, meaning that if it's face on, it's like theory you could be taught. Experiential learning is from behind. You've already passed through something, and it's a punch. But then later he says in the book, and it's a punch that you ultimately are thankful for. And like we suffered a little bit in the fall, and it was not fun, and I'm really grateful for it.
Since getting your diagnosis, you have definitely pursued, we could say, the end of the road less traveled. A sort of contra the tech bros, you have not pursued uploading your brain or downloading your consciousness. If anything, it's been more like the embodied finitude tour.
That's a great tattoo. The embodied finitude tour with stops in Southeast DC, June 2nd. Follow us to Scranton, June 30th.
And on top of that, you've launched a podcast about pursuing, hope, joy, and meaning in lives. So why have you pursued this unusual route? What impact do you want to have?
First, I'll come to the podcast second, but we're not doing that much. We're declining almost everything, and in God's providence, a lot of interviews have gone viral. And I, again, think there's a sociological thing, there's a sociological thing going on where
we live such weirdly rich lives that people are insulated from experiencing multi-generational living. And so they're not around death. And so I think there's a curiosity about it. And then once somebody has shared Ben Sasse end-of-life content, X serves you more. And so we're not doing a lot, but then people that forwarded previous stuff, it kind of goes viral again the next time. So the first bucket is there's not a lot of content we're providing, but I have thought for a long time that there is a common grace, theological vacuity, is that the right adjective? In our time, that denying death allows you to think something like that clavicular guy and looks-maxing. Like, if people are gawking at it just because it's stupid, then I can understand how it becomes a little bit viral. Anybody who actually cares about, like, can we scrape down the jawline to be perfectly symmetrical on both sides? It feels like the only way you could do that is being delusionally in denial about the fact that we're mortals. Like, there's just so much shallow stuff that we spend a lot of time on, and I think it's tragic. And I think, living through the digital revolution, as we all are, is a really interesting moment to live, but I disaggregate the consumption and production pieces of it. As consumers, median middle-class Americans are already the richest people any time and place in human history, and about to get lots and lots richer. Great, but more consumption when you're already rich, we have a lot of data that doesn't really make anybody happier. It's just a new baseline. It's Arthur Brooks talks about it as the arrival fallacy. Whatever becomes the new lived experience median norm that you expect doesn't actually bring greater joy or pleasure. It's just a reset moment that now becomes the baseline floor. The real question about, I think, this revolution is, at a productive level, how do you get leverage out of getting to work better and more meaningful to serve your neighbors? But you got to think about that difference between production and consumption. And I think our consumption is so shallow that I've wished, and I've said this publicly for a long time before I had a terminal diagnosis, that there was a way that we could have more meaningful conversations about death, because it is a common grace blessing to shatter our self-idolatry. So I didn't really choose to die in public, but I just felt like you had to tell your family and friends, and in a world that's partly digital, when stuff went viral, even though you're turning down most interviews, you do some, and it looks like you're dying in public, and then it becomes a little bit of a calling to defend what you believe. And so I've been surprised how many people in the limited number of interviews we've done, what a high ratio of them ask, are you mad at God? And I don't fault anybody for the question, but we don't identify with it at all. Like, if the law is straight and I am crooked, it seems weird to think the thing that's wrong is the law. The thing that's wrong is me. And so anything that I get that's good is more than I deserved. And so saying that seems surprising to people, but I think it's an opportunity for Christians together to explain it to our neighbors.
Boy, there's so many different, There's so many different directions we could go there. I want to pick up on one of the things you said about consumption and production. This is an idea that you've developed for many years. It's essentially part of raising young men and women of character is to focus on consumption, focus on production rather than consumption. But we're kind of at a point where the felt need for production is kind of in decline. There's an increased desire to kind of make one's money through crypto or online gambling. And now we are on the cusp of an AI revolution, which may well make it unnecessary for people to actually produce work. What does it mean for formation and for the next generation if productive activity is no longer economically necessary?
Yeah, I think you're hitting your nail right on somewhere. Your hammer right on the head of the nail. There's a metaphor in there somewhere. I think you're spot on that the debate about UBI, I think is nearly inevitable, unless we just don't even get to have the debate because we just drift straight into everybody being on welfare. And I think that's disastrous for human anthropology and for human souls. I think it's disastrous for a free republic. But I do think it's the conversation that's coming soon. And so the overly simplistic debates about the digital revolution and the jobs apocalypse are sometimes just optimism versus pessimism, or accelerationism versus safetyism. I don't know if this one might possibly be different than all the past times when it looked like there might be a technological revolution that created a jobs apocalypse, but I'm mildly on the optimistic side of the midpoint in the debate, which is the unbundling and rebundling of jobs will probably lead to net job creation, not actually a jobs apocalypse. But I think that two things happen en route. One, work becomes discretionary for a lot more people because a lot of people become rich. And I think a lot of the new jobs potentially are much less meaningful and much less satisfying. So I know that you have a couple of reporters here and some of this is streaming, so I'm just acknowledging what I usually try to duck so that I don't end up caricatured in it. Like I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about online porn. But I think we know that the outcome of that experientially is disastrous for people's souls. So I tend to talk about OnlyFans models that sell foot fetish pictures, right? So skirt just south of porn maybe a little bit, but say, I don't see for the consumer or the producer in this transaction that it's meaningful. And when you believe that people are created with dignity, we should care not just about the economic stats on some sheet about whether or not there are jobs, but whether or not these are jobs that on Friday night, I'm saying Friday night as just stereotypical as the end of a work week. Do you think you did something meaningful where somebody needed you that week, where you lived a life of gratitude to God by doing something that benefited your neighbor? We all know that there are very few variables that ultimately drive human happiness. There's some stuff that's genetic, but it's basically, do you have a family? Do you have a few deep friendships? Do you have a theology to make sense of death and suffering? And do you have meaningful work? And statistically, in the sociology of happiness literature, and here I'm just stealing from Arthur Brooks, but in the sociology of happiness literature, the highest statistical correlate to happiness is meaningful work. I believe all four of these matter: family, friends, theology, and work. But statistically in the social science literature, it looks like having somebody who needs you at work, that there's something that you do that benefits someone else, is the highest correlate to happiness. And I just don't buy that's going to come from selling fetish photos of your feet. And I don't mean to be a know-it-all by saying that. I think most everybody kind of knows that. But I'm in an argument, a healthy wrestling argument with people I like, but I'm in an argument with some friends in Silicon Valley. And because I'm not an unmitigated accelerationist, at a national security level, I want the US to win all these things versus the CCP. So I'm a regulatory skeptic of a lot of stuff in the AI space. But because I'm not an unmitigated zealot about the accelerationist position, I have some buddies who basically want to caricature my view and say, oh, well, you're probably worried about ubiquitous robot sex or something. Like, yeah, I'm really worried about that. I think, when the average age of male exposure to porn is like 10 years old in America, and the frontal lobe isn't formed, that's not good for them. And so an extreme libertarian position that says not only government stay out of the way, but any debates about virtue and self-restraint and self-control stay out of the way, I think that's a really naive position to hold. And I think it's worth thinking about the curves. I got to get my X and Y axis right. When you do the history, we didn't have any data during nomadism. But if you do agrarianism, industrialization, and now the knowledge economy, right? We know once upon a time, it took 95% of American people in a civilization work in agriculture to feed your community. And today in the US, it's well under 2% of Americans working in agriculture, and yet the total output is much higher than it's ever been before. We know that in the late 1950s, 32% of Americans worked in big tool economy jobs, worked in factories. Today, it's less than 7% of Americans, and you can have debates about globalization and trade. I'm a free trade zealot, but you can differ with me on that. The simple fact is, today's less than 7% of Americans working in industrialization produce more output than the 32% of Americans who were working in industrial callings in the 1950s. And so we know what these curves look like, and the knowledge economy is going to have a declining number of workers once the AI revolution is fully present among us. And so the question is, what is the next phase of work? And I think it's likely going to be some version of, best way to say it, relational jobs. Worst way to say it, influencer jobs. And I'm not sure that the debates we've been having about Ohio and the burned over Rust Belt district and declining brawn jobs are gonna say, well, that was really bad. But going from knowledge economy jobs to influencer jobs on Instagram, that'll be just fine for human souls and satisfaction. I think we know that's not gonna be the case. And so we have to figure out what it looks like to be able to do productive labor, because we're image bearers of God, and God worked for 6 days and then rested. And we now get to move the Sabbath to day one, so we get the gifts of grace first, and then we live a life of gratitude. But we're meant to do productive work. We're not meant to conceive of ourselves chiefly as consumers. So I think that anthropologically, we got a big thing in front of us.
One sort of interesting and fairly depressing correlate of the rise of the influencer economy has been a huge surge in loneliness. And you've written a great deal about just how an epidemic of loneliness has affected our personal health and well-being, but even more than that, our civic health and well-being. The average number of friends someone reports having has fallen almost half, and this seems to affect young men the most. You, as in many ways, are an outlier in this area. You have sustained a circle of close guy friends from college, perhaps earlier on. And for the young men out there who might be struggling, would love to get your thoughts on what does it mean to be a good friend? You know, what have you learned over the years in your own friendships and how to sustain them?
Well, thank you. I feel incredibly blessed to have 9 or 10 guys that I am still very close to, and the vast majority of them are friendships that were formed at 18 to 24 years old. And maybe just first a point on your loneliness intro. The University of Arizona had a study come out a month or two ago that showed that the share of Americans that have 0 close friends has quadrupled since 1990. It's not a majority of Americans, but it's a big not a plurality, but it's a significant share of Americans. I think it's 35-ish%, but it's a quadrupling since 1990 of people who have no close friendships. I think it's pretty obvious that when you work alongside someone in a shared task, in a shared cause, the chances that you get to become good friends are a lot better than something that is merely a discretionary consumption choice. Should we do this one hobby together occasionally? There's no thickness that binds you together like something that feels more foxhole-ish because you really needed each other. And so the richer we get, the stranger it will be to have lasting friendships. And I think if you think of spousal friendship as well, as age of family formation continues to drift later, one deep friendship doesn't happen for a lot of people till a lot longer later or never. But it also becomes a model for friendship that you don't get to have when you're 18 or 20 or 22 years old. And it's a lot harder to form these things later than earlier. One more stat, of 60-year-old men, 61% define their wife as their best friend. Of 60-year-old women, only 29% define their husband as their best friend. It's funny, I definitely tell it to set it up as a punchline, but it's also super tragic in a world where you're unlikely to have the experiences again at 40 or 45 or 50 or 55 years old that you got to have at 18 or 20 or 22 years old. And what's obvious in that data is that women are better than men on average at forming new friendships when disruption occurs. And men are much less good on average at forming new friendships when disruption occurs. And we're entering a world where disruption is going to be ubiquitous. And so I don't think I have any great lessons, but I have a couple of thoughts. One of them is, you asked about the time at the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Some of my friends are people that I got to work with there or learn from there. And wrestling through big worldview questions, reading long-form stuff together can bind you together. There are a lot of people that I share short-form crap with, mind-rot videos that are funny. So I'm not against it, but we should recognize that it is cotton candy. It's not a meaningful substitute for reading and deliberation. Traveling together, some of my best buddies are guys I've traveled the world with, and it can sound super privileged or entitled to say, I've traveled the world. No, I mean, I traveled the world. I see Eric Gregory here, our friend, your friend, Scott Brady and I traveled Europe together in 1992, 93. We literally lived on $6 a day for like half a year. This is not a super privileged thing. We had a Eurail pass, and then if you wanted to be in a city 2 days in a row, you would never stay in that city day 1 and 2. You would be in that city day 1 and 3, so you could take an overnight train out for 12 hours to sleep, and then the next night you'd take the overnight train back for 12 hours. Who needs a shower once a week? Once every 10 days is fine. Why would you pay $12 for a hostel if you can sleep for free on the train? And so the root of the word travel is the same as the root of the word travail. It is not luxury vacation. It is a journey to try to go and see and explore and understand the world. It's a kind of working together. So I think core work together is essential. But I think reading together, worshiping together, traveling together, there are lots of ways that you can mix your labor with someone else and build a friendship that lasts. And last point here, for those of us who are living through what will, if it works out, be thought of eventually as the hybrid revolution, not merely the digital revolution, what you want is place, embodiment, ensoulment, community. What you want is physical, material bodies, because we're not we're not abstract spirits. We're embodied souls. What you want is place that then gets augmented by the benefits of the digital revolution, not the digital revolution and the possible chance to use this as an excuse to let my consciousness drift from the time and place where I'm actually breaking bread with people or making babies with someone or communing with people. You want this to supplement, not supplant those things, and we get that. Like, I think part of the reason why I have the 9 or 10 good buddies that you mentioned is because we use WhatsApp every day. And so even if sometimes you're only together every 6 months or every 24 months, we're still all kind of current on what's happening in each other's lives.
So many things to ask you. We're going to get to reading in a second, which you brought up, but I want to camp a little bit on manhood, in that these are confusing times for young men. I'm so glad your son, Breck, who's 15, is with us. But there's a lot.
And I just want to say something against the lad. I've lost 2 inches in 7 months. Like, I've gone from 5'11" to 5'9". I haven't gotten a good explanation from my docs about why a tumor pressing on your spine makes you shorter. But I've gone from 5'11" to 5'9", and so cocky, he's gone from like 5'2" to 5'6.5" in the same period. So like, our lines are converging, and he's not gonna grow a foot in the year, but he seems to have closed on me by a foot in the year, and I'm tired of him. He just claimed 5'7.5", which is a 1-inch exaggeration since yesterday. Back to you, ma'am.
Yeah.
He's super disrespectful.
So for young men like Breck, on one hand, there are those who would stifle, even stigmatize, boyish energy, male risk-taking, even call some masculinity itself, label it as toxic. And on the other hand, you have a lot of toxic, deeply toxic behavior, either excused as merely masculine, boys will be boys, or worse, valorized as some kind of alpha male status symbol or prerogative. When you're a star, they let you do it. Worse, it seems like the biggest voices and influencers are usually of the latter camp. What advice do you give to Breck, and would you give to other young men about what it means to be a man?
Well, a well-framed question, and I want to lower expectations at the front that I don't think I'm any expert on this, but I've been thinking about it a little bit. What is the purpose of power? What is the purpose of sometimes violence? It's to protect. It's not for offense. It's for defense. It's for preservation. And so my dad was a football coach, and weirdly, I've joked that when you're 54 and you don't have a terminal diagnosis, nobody thinks you're that wise. You're 54 and you get a terminal diagnosis, all of a sudden you're supposedly super wise. I'm on a lot more drugs than before. I don't think I'm wiser. Maybe a little less self-doubt about just saying what you think if you're on 55 milligrams of morphine. But I get invited to speak to a number of football teams now. This is new. So I've done some high school stuff, and I've turned down some college stuff, but I was thinking about saying yes to a college heading into the end of this summer maybe, and I've been reflecting a little bit on what a well-disciplined football team does, and they use violence in a very precise, controlled way for a specific objective, and all of the other places, they police that there's no violence. You don't hit after the whistle. You don't hit somebody on the sidelines. You don't bully somebody in the locker room. You don't spit on somebody at the handshake. Like, you're using the violence for a very particular purpose, and you execute sufficient self-control and group ethos development about what is and isn't appropriate among us. And so I guess I've been thinking a lot about the nature of what it looks like to grow in self-discipline, self-governance, self-restraint, self-control, so you don't have to have other discipline, other constraint, other governance, and other control. And it aligns with the dignity of what humans are for. Also, and I won't go long here because I want you to take the floor back, but I have been thinking a lot about the institutionalization of childhood, and I think it's pretty bad overall, but I think it's obviously bad for the vast majority of boys. The idea that you should be inside, sitting still, on passive receive mode for the vast majority of the waking hours every day, I just think is incredibly stupid. And I think eventually, I don't know if it's 10 years from now or 50 years from now, but I think eventually we're gonna look back on this moment and we're gonna think it's weird how long factory model schooling outlived factories. And nomads didn't educate this way. They didn't do work home this way. Agrarians didn't educate this way. They didn't do work home this way. The factory model for work is 175 years old. And the factory model for childhood at a mass scale is only about 110 years old. And contra a lot of, I accidentally wanted to do historiography for a minute. I'm real proud of myself that I caught myself. There's a theory that, like, isn't it great the way, during progressivism of the 1870s to 19-teens and 1920s, isn't it great the way we did this wonderful thing of growing truancy laws and compulsory attendance laws as if this was something that was done on behalf of poor people? Like, the spread and rise of American public schooling in the factory model was overwhelmingly about separating Catholic kids from their parents and their parish. Like, that's what it was for. And I think we now know that work and home being as separated as they've been has lots and lots of downsides, and the digital economy, for good and for ill, but ultimately among intentional parents and workers for good, being able to have more schedule control and choice about when you bucketize family stuff and when you get your focused work done and what kind of work you can do alongside other people. I think eventually the 40-hour-a-week institutionalized factory model school will not be replaced with some new 40-hour thing. It will be replaced by a 2-hour thing and a 10-hour thing and a 5-hour thing and a 15-hour thing and some digital this and a new community that and better youth sports, and different things are going to disrupt that factory model. And when that comes, I think we're going to look back on this moment and wonder why we assumed that the passivity was possibly going to produce entrepreneurial, self-motivated workers who could navigate the disrupted economy of the post-digital revolution. And we're going to know that we did this for way, way too long, and we should be encouraging more self-ownership, autodidacticism, and entrepreneurial disruption among 12 and 14 and 16 and 18-year-olds, and especially 14 and 16 and 18-year-old boys.
So earlier you mentioned how important reading was to the formation of your friendships, and you've written several times about just the importance of deep reading, really in forming not just friendships, but forming people. And of course there's a challenge there because reading is in decline. We overall are reading less, we're reading difficult literature less, we're reading in groups less, and we're spending more and more time on devices who are engineered to basically hijack the attention that's required for deep reading. And so I want to ask you both kind of what is lost by that and what can be regained. And relatedly, you've also written about the priority that you and Melissa have placed on building a family bookshelf of weighty works that helped basically ground and form an ongoing conversation within your family and even your extended family. And would love to hear you talk along about the importance of reading, what books, how you built your own family bookshelf, and what books you think people under 30 should be sure to read.
Yeah, that's fun. Thank you. Glad we're staying till midnight. First, just a little small point. You said reading together. Boy, do we miss out if we don't ever read together. And it's also sing together and make music together and do lots of other things together. How strange it is that now we think of music as something that you just buy from some, maybe at its best, singer-songwriter, or maybe performing artist, hired actor to do this thing. It's great to have some of that. I'm glad we had radios and the next iteration, but better still to have somebody in your family or more than one person in your family pull out a guitar or a fiddle or a piano and then sing together. We were with some friends over this weekend, and multiple days we ended up passing out hymnals and everybody just started singing together. And I suspect that lots more people want that as lived experience, but it's a collective action problem that it's hard to start doing, and we need to figure out how to do it and be willing to do the awkward thing. I have 20-something daughters, and so, I've read some of the literature about how much less they dance than people danced in the 80s, my middle school and high school years. And I mean, I was terrible, but there's no video record of it. So I don't have to suffer from some stupid moment except for the people there who can still tell the stories about the overbite, you know? I think that was a Saturday Night Live reference, but I'm not sure. So the reading together point, I think, is super important, and we still do that at our house. We're 2/3 empty nesters, but Melissa and Breck and I still read books together in the evenings, not multiple nights a week, but regularly. And that is special and needs to be re-socialized. We use the phrase the rereadables about the 5-foot shelf of books. Like, what books, you only got so many days or weeks or months left in your life. How many pages you're probably going to read? How many books are you going to get read? And how many times do you want to just take the gamble on reading something new that may or may not be worth your time? Do it, definitely, but don't exclusively do it. Also reread good things over and over so that you can form a canon. The canon is always going to have debates. That's part of the point. But it's great to have some shared books with people. I know a lot of people who were at Stanford pre, during, and post the 87, 88, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ's got to go. And after those marches, and when Stanford threw their shared curriculum overboard, later, some of the alumni, when surveyed, said they maybe didn't necessarily agree with what was in the canon, but they'd rather have a canon they disagreed with than no canon, because it was a shared experience, even if you didn't think those were the right books. Mm-hmm. So you said people under 30. We've been reading a lot of C.S. Lewis lately. I wish if I had more time, I could find people who'd read Rousseau's A Meal with Me. He's terribly wrong about almost everything, and still, what an awesome book. I mean, let's think about how broken this dude is. His wife dies, and he has 4 kids, and he dumps them at an orphanage so that he can have more time to write a book about parenting. And his anthropology is just wrong about everything, but it's a really, really instructive way to get to a counter-argument. So, like, that's an example of a book that I think is incredibly flawed, and yet I wish I could read it a few more times with people in common. I could do a lot more popcorn, but MLK's letter from the Birmingham jail is something that we've reflected on again recently.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so much more I'd love to ask. What we're going, in just a minute or two, we're going to take questions from those of you in the audience. But before that, one last question, and I'm actually going to draw on the beautiful article your daughter Alex wrote for the Free Press. And she said this: tell me 3 true things about yourself. If I had to define the parenting style of my father, Ben Sasse, in one sentence, it would be those 7 words. After any success or failure, whether jumping with excitement or drenched in tears, my dad asked us to recite 3 things. 1 that reaffirmed our relationship to God, 1 that reaffirmed our family's unconditional love for us, and 1 that reaffirmed qualities we most valued, like perseverance or grit. Ben, tell me 3 true things about yourself.
When we ask that and my wife gets all the credit here, she's the one who started it, but the 3 questions are about unconditional love from God, unconditional love and acceptance in this family, and now go kick some ass. Like, go be gritty, like go fight, win. And if you don't win, all the other 2 things are still true. You're not earning your salvation, and you're not earning your place in our family. You're loved. You're blood. And now go be gritty. Those are roughly my 3 too, right? Like, I know that my Redeemer lives. I'm unconditionally loved. I have an amazing friend. There's a lot of stuff that's not fun right now. And I'm going to spare you, the conversations we have with my hospice doc. But Melissa's going to be my friend to the end. And I'm trying to not open up a can of pansy ass here, so I gotta something more of a joke. February 21st, 1990, I peed down my leg and finished 7th in the state wrestling tournament in Nebraska, and I was supposed to win that tournament. The summer before, there's sort of like a preview for folks who wrestle year-round. There's a summer state tournament. I won the state tournament easy, summer between junior and senior year. And in the big state tournament that really mattered, I got 7th instead of winning. And I think for 5 weeks, like from the end of February until April 1st, I don't think the sun ever shone in Nebraska. Like, it was such a terrible thing to have a terrible wrestling tournament. And now at 54, no joke, I'm super glad I lost. Like, having won that tournament would have taught me a lot less than losing. And you have to be the parent to know to say that. And your kids don't know that. When they're 17 and they lose something big, they really think it's the end of the world. And they have to know points 1 and 2 are true. And then the grit is formed. I, again, as the son of a football coach, I know Nick Saban a little bit, and I like him just fine, but I kind of get annoyed at how much credit he gets for the way he talks about the process, because this is not unique to him. Every good football coach ever has had the same idea, which is, I don't golf, but I get the logic of, if you miss a shot golfing, when you walk up to the next shot, you should have that last shot be gone out of your consciousness. Now's the time to go and do the thing that's in front of you, not have regret about the shot that you just missed. And I have many fights with Elon Musk, but one of the things that I am fascinated about his, spectrum psychology and therefore entrepreneurship, is the people around him claim that when they were trying to catch the rockets, when they would miss, and it would splash down, and the catch of the rocket was a failure, he felt no regret. Like, he wasn't embarrassed about somebody who was going to say, "I told you so." It was just a new data point as he built toward the next catch. Like, immediately, he was living Nick Saban's The Process. And it seems to me that's the only way to live the vast majority of life, is being able to, when something's great, cherish it, linger. When something's bad, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm looking forward.
Yeah. So we're going to take a few questions from those of you in the audience. There'll be 2 mics circulating with McCrae and Leo. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. They will find one of you and come over there. And a few things just to mention as we do this. One, we know there's so many people who would love to say something, send a message to Ben. And on your seat should have been, in addition to a Trinity Forum reading that Ben introduced on Alexis de Tocqueville, there should be a blank card. And the reason for that blank card is so that you can write a message to Ben. There will be baskets as you exit that you can drop that off in, and all of those cards will be sent along to Ben. So if you're not able to get your question or your message in, there's another opportunity. So a question for Ben. McCrae, I'll go to you.
Thank you very much for being here today. It's been great to listen to you, even though I'm a Democrat. I think my question, just like looking at your career in retrospect, like, you're obviously a very, very accomplished person, and like, we all know that you don't achieve the things that you've achieved without working extremely hard, and you've kind of alluded to it. But I guess the question I have as someone like beginning my career is, like, when you're actually in the moment, like, what is it that drives like workaholism? And like, when is it workaholism versus just being very committed to your career? Like, what does that feel like? And then how do you know when it's time to maybe step back, start focusing on your family? Should it be balanced the whole way through? Like, how do you look at that? Thank you.
Thanks. I think a lot about different chunks of time: the day, the week, the season, the year. And it's pretty interesting that the day is firmly rooted in nature, the year is firmly rooted in nature. The month is, 29 versus 30 and a half days is a little different. But the month exists in nature and the tides and the moons. The week doesn't exist in nature. The week is a theological gift, and the switching of the Sabbath from the end of the week to the beginning of the week is pretty foundational to my identity as a Christian, right? I'm not working to earn something and then I get to take a break. I get the gift of grace at the beginning of the week, and then I go live a life out of gratitude to that, but it's not my identity. My identity was in the gift. And so it seems to me that you had multiple portions of your question, but the middle portion was on work versus workaholism. Workaholism is the idolatry of trying to self-justify and build an identity or build a name for ourselves, to build a storehouse that's sufficient to insulate me against the vicissitudes of seasons and harvests and time. That's foolish. I can't do it. I'm not going to succeed. I'm going to get metastasized cancer, or you're going to have, a bus hit you, right? At the end of the day, we are finite mortals, and we can't earn an identity. We receive an adopted identity as a gift, and then we get to live in response. Then let's go kick some butt. Let's go grit it out and do meaningful stuff. And I think it's pretty interesting to not be under performance when that rocket's crashing down into the sea and you want to solve the engineering riddle of figuring out how we're going to catch that rocket. And so a writ small version of the theology of the week seems to me to also be acknowledging our need for rest daily, right? Can I stop working? And at the times when my workaholism was at its worst, and maybe a parenthetical thought, my repentance to my family about workaholism didn't come after a terminal diagnosis. It was about 3 or 4 years ago that I went to my family and said, I have a problem and I want to repent of my workaholism. The terminal diagnosis is maybe a time where I've talked about it more in public, but this was a handful of years ago. And I definitely knew the times when the addictive behavior or the OCD stuff was the worst, and that was when you couldn't turn off work to go to bed. You couldn't look at the product of your day, whether it was successful or not, and be grateful that you had the chance to invest in that kind of service. And so to me, the week is the theological picture because it's such an outlier to nature, but in the Lord's Prayer, being able to pray, give us this day our daily bread, means gratitude for basic needs met. And then you get to live a life that's pretty dang fun. And there's a lot of diverse callings in this room that are interesting, but they're not going to bring about heaven. They're provisional and they're great. They're driven by gratitude.
Yeah. Leo, do you have someone?
Mr. Sasse, thank you so much for being here. You had I'm a student, so I'm a fairly young person, and you had a lot of really good pieces of advice for people my age, from education, family, technology, and so I was just wondering if you had some thoughts on practical steps you would take as a student or as a young adult to live a life that sort of really gets the idea of our reliance on God and understands that while still serving him well. How would you prepare for that as a young person?
And do you mean particularly while you're a full-time student?
I mean, I'm a full-time student, but also just as someone who's sort of still growing into their life.
Gotcha.
Like a career, family, that sort of thing.
Maybe two small but very concrete things. One is C.S. Lewis's essay, Learning in Wartime, I think is an excellent essay thinking about how could you possibly study things that are seemingly theoretical or abstract when there's so much urgent stuff around you where there's need. There will always be urgent stuff around you that has need. And God created us to think his thoughts after him and be fascinated by the structure and diversity of the creation. It's so much more diverse than we can possibly understand. But I've made jokes, not being very musically inclined, in some of the podcasts. I never got back to the podcast in that earlier answer. Sorry about that. I got to write David Coleman back. I got to follow up with dangling participles and an answer to a question in front of my friend Cherie. I've made jokes about the relationship between abstract math and music a handful of times on some podcasts over the last 6 months. 8/5 is a structure that's in a lot of music, and there's something in our brains that seems to yearn for closure in a lot of different melody and harmony stuff where we're not satisfied. There's something incomplete when you don't finish the last note of that song. And I've been stunned at how many big brains have written me notes or letters or emails taking that thought, which I thought was just kind of throwaway line from mine, and they said, well, what do you think the language of heaven is, Sasse? You really think we're all going to learn Hebrew or everybody's going to learn English or there's some lost language? Don't you think the language of heaven is probably going to be music? I'm like, whoa, more morphine, please. I had never thought about that. There's a reason why somebody is suffering 2 miles or 20 miles from your house that could always disrupt you from being able to think and study more theoretical stuff. And yet we're also made to explore the diversity of creation. So I think Lewis is really interesting in that. The second thing, and slightly more concrete, but related to the comments I was making critical of institutionalized schooling, I think we should always recognize that schooling really is just a tool, and we should think of tools like that as training wheels. And what would it look like when the training wheels aren't there? And I'm all for more. I don't want to get near a debate, especially when Coleman introduced us, and I see Jeremy's here from CLT. I was meaning to fight the UC system about the decline of standardized testing, and now I'm just bracketing that so you can know why I look like I'm an errant thought here. We need lots of rigor around testing, to be sure, and yet when you go from 14 to 17 to 20 to 23 to 26, at some point you shouldn't give a rip about grades anymore, right? The point should be, I want to wrestle with these ideas, and I want to be in conversation with other people who've read these books. And I think we should have the idea, the end in mind early on, that Mother May I around schooling is just a temporary thing to learn some habits that 7 and 9-year-olds are not going to do without some accountability. But we should get beyond the grades in a hurry to being actually intoxicated by the ideas.
And we'll take one last question.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for
This guy's scary.
for the comments and for the witness. Faith is obviously hugely important in your life. I wonder if you could share how you think your life would be different without your faith, or what would be missing in your life if you didn't have it, or conversely, what it's given to you that you wouldn't have if you weren't a person of faith.
Well, I mean, there's the old philosophical adage that the only real question at the end of it all is suicide. And it seems to me that you either distract yourself or everything would become pointless if you agree that death and mortality and finitude are real and you don't think there's any future. And I think we're relational beings, and God, the Trinity, had internal relationship that overflowed in love and a choice to create, and that bizarrely, God desires relationship with us. And if that weren't true, I don't know why anything else would ever conceivably matter. And so I think the way you'd get around that, the self-medication, would be either to deal with that grand abyss or a constant distraction. And I think we looked at a lot of our neighbors, And there's never been as plentiful opportunity to self-delude and self-distract as there is right now. I held up the phone earlier. That supercomputer can be used for amazing good. It can also be an unbelievably ubiquitous liar, trying to be a casino in our pocket, distracting us from anything serious. And it seems like real adulthood is the ability to turn that off, to sit still, to think long, and to wrestle with questions about the good, the true, and the beautiful. And it's kind of inconceivable to me that you could say, I think there's nothing else, but let's still take a trip to Cancun next weekend. Why? It seems pointless to me. So I am unbelievably grateful for having written texts. And at our house this weekend, we had a devotional that centered on Romans 5. And after Paul has outlined what it looks like to be justified and forgiven, he moves into what suffering is. And it just seems so self-evidently true that suffering can produce perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And I can't imagine any of us, not Ben Sasse with a terminal diagnosis, but all 900 of us with terminal diagnoses. I can't imagine dealing with the Odyssey and suffering without a sense that there was a future with redemption.
In just a minute or two, we're going to conclude with the last word from Ben. Before that, though, there are a few invitations we would like to extend to all of you. First, as noted previously, we invite you to send a message to Ben. There will be baskets as you exit that you can just drop those in and they will all get back to him. Second, we'd like to invite you to visit the book table. On that book table are a number of Trinity Forum readings, all of which are texts which also feature in Ben's bookshelf that he outlined in The Vanishing American Adult. They're all different readings which grapple with the big questions of life, and so we invite you to help yourself and to look at, check that out. Third, we would love to invite each and every one of you to join the Trinity Forum Society, which is the community of people which help advance Trinity Forum's mission of cultivating, curating, and communicating the best of Christian thought for the common good. It's a mighty little community that does a lot of very good things in a culture that is riven by deep division, even nihilism, and we would love for you to join it. There's also a number of benefits to that, including a subscription to our quarterly readings, our daily What We're Reading list of curated reading recommendations, and if you join tonight, we will also give you a bundle of readings that feature in Ben's bookshelf. In addition, we'd love to kind of just invite you to be grateful with us for the people who helped make tonight possible. And any event like this requires the work of lots of people, and so it's appropriate to end with thanks. I'd like to thank Mark Batterson and the National Community Church for hosting us. Our many generous sponsors, I will not go through them all. They are up on the screen. We so appreciate all of your generosity. Would love to give a special thanks to the College Board, both to David Coleman and the extraordinary Stephanie Sanford for their work in helping to make this happen. Our photographers, Annie Henke and Susan Biaggi. My colleagues at the Trinity Forum, Tom Walsh, Campbell Vogel, Marianne Morris, McCrae Henke, Jack Anderson, and Heidi Little. Our excellent interns, Leo Hawk, Arden Jaco, Danielle Kinney, Spencer Yim, and our many volunteers. I'll just briefly run through this list. Alyssa Ollie, Faith Anderson, Alice Arnold, Luke Babler, Leslie Biggers, Kat Bryant, Robin Dixon, Gail Gerard, Taylor Hartley, Kira Conson, Walker Little, Nicholas Polp, Ashley Turner, and Jordan Volk. We so appreciate your help. But it's most fitting to end with a last word from Ben. So Ben, the final word is yours.
I will not be anticlimactic. I will simply say I already lost a bet. My 15-year-old son pointed at his watch a minute ago because he said, "You won't actually end by 8:30, Dad. You'll run long." So I just want to say thank you to you, Sheree, and to your team for hosting us. There is not time to run through all of the names that we feel such great gratitude to, but Melissa and I, in the last 2 days as we were heading here, got texts from dozens and dozens of you that we wish we could go out for a drink with after this. And we have been just so touched by your prayers. And to say sincerely, in the second half of Ephesians, there's a transition point in the book or in the letter where Paul basically says there are 4 things that characterize Christians, and it is a life of gratitude. It is singing, constant singing. What a weird thing to be in a list of only 4. Number 3, singing together. So now it's half. It's 2 of the 4. And number 4, not thinking of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather wanting to find a way to get into a service posture. And we have had so many family and friends wanting to figure out how to serve us during these last 5.5 months. And regularly people will say, well, what can we do besides pray? Like, we'll definitely pray, but like, we want to do something else. Can we bring you more food? And we're like, honestly, dude, we're throwing away so much food. Like, people have been so generous. Your prayers are real. We feel them. And who knows in God's providence what the instrumentalities are, but we're also on a miracle drug now. We had a 3 to 4 month life expectancy 5.5 months ago because for the first time in 40 years, there's a drug that's making a difference in pancreatic cancer. And I'm gonna die of this, but I would much rather have extra months with my wife and my son as we planned for it than to have just dropped dead immediately when we were diagnosed. And I'll be back in the hospital in Houston tomorrow morning. And at MD Anderson, which is an unbelievable facility, amazing team we have, and amazing work that they do in general, 36 people die a day of cancer. That's the scale of this hospital. And every time we're there, people come up to us and they feel like we've done something to serve them because we've been talking about the hope of the resurrection in the face of cancer. And I'm gratified by that chance to give some stranger a hug when you're in line at the clinical trial protocol drug weird pharmacy that they got on the 9th floor. But I'm also aware of how many people we've met there who are suffering alone. There are a ton of people at that special hospital that don't have anybody there with them when they're getting their care. We've never once felt alone. We're grateful chiefly to God for the hope of the resurrection, but also incredibly grateful to you all that we've felt your prayers and your friendship, and we've never once felt alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you and good night.